Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Also, make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. That's our Discord server. It's rolling right now. I just popped in there. This is Heat Conversation all day long. You can check out at any time. Check out the 10 channels that we've got there. Also, the stage shows that you can't find anywhere else. Off the Floor will be adding even more features pretty soon. So check it out. Click on the link in the description. You'll bypass the Apple upcharge. Just pay the $2.99 a month. You can cancel at any time. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network, including the new sponsor of our Who's on the Move segment. You'll be hearing a lot of that over the next week. It's Cousins USA Moving and Storage, family owned and operated since 1996. They can service both residential and commercial moves, whether you're going across town, across the state, across the country. Maybe you're going to have to play in another NBA city, or even across the globe. They've got a 15,000 square foot private warehouse in Lauderhill in Broward County. Number one priority, transparency and being honest with their customers. They got a very low turnover rate, with most of their movers working with them for over 10 years. So find them online at Cousins Moving. That's at Cousins Moving on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, or visit the website www.cousinsusa.com/5RSN. Also, if you mention Five Reasons, they'll give you 5 free wardrobe boxes with your next move. Mention 5 Reasons or 5 on the Floor. Again, it's cousinsusa.com/5RSN. And now, today's episode.
Down the bitch gang. Yikes. 5 on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frogs. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat we trust.
You sound scared.
It's power have the guts, we're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the Five Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at the Five Reasons Sports. I got Greg Sylvander. You can follow him at Greg Sylvander. We've given you a lot of episodes lately, so make sure that you check all of them out. Did one with Naveen Ganglani after Tyler Hero made the All-Star team, so make sure that you check that one out. Did that the other night. Congratulations again to Tyler. We'll have more content related to that going forward. Also did an episode with Brady Hawk about what the Heat can do to get out of this middling space. I feel like we do this episode a lot, but needed to do it again. They're at 500. They have like a magnetic force. There's a magnetic force pulling them back to 500. They go under, they go over, they come back to 500. They're like the new Atlanta Hawks. Okay, actually, the Hawks have lost 7 in a row as we speak, so they're doing better than them, and they've lost Jalen Johnson for the season, so things could be worse, but you know what I mean. The Hawks have been this kind of mediocre team for a very long time. The Heat are in that space. They were in the 6th spot coming into tonight, and it doesn't look like they can really move up, but it doesn't look like they can move that far down based on the nature of the Eastern Conference. So Brady and I went through some things that could change the trajectory. Maybe some of you will have some other ideas. But today I'm just going to, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to try to break this down and look at the next 5 days or 6 days. Where are we at? Today's the 31st, and the trade deadline is the 6th, Thursday afternoon. Daughter has a soccer game, by the way, right in the middle of the trade deadline, so I'm sure this is going to go right up to the end, and I'll get that notification at some point or some text. I'm going to be out in West
Don't
Broward
worry, we
County
got you, Ethan. We got you.
where I can't get service, and it's going to be a whole disaster. But you can't plan these things too far in advance. But we're going to get into the trade deadline, obviously, and we're going to have a ton of content leading up to that. But the feature here is Jimmy Butler, and you have a very definite perspective on this. And I think at some point, like, we have to stop trying to technically break this down and just like get into the emotion of it, because I find myself shooting stuff down on Twitter all day long, and shooting stuff down from, and I respect many of them, but from national reporters and aggregators who really don't have a feel for how the Heat operate. Like, they can speak to what other teams may do. They can speak to what agents are telling them. Other executives may be telling them what Jimmy might prefer, but they keep putting things out there that are just not relevant because there are certain guidelines that the Heat are just not going to go past. And if you know the organization and the way that they operate, as I think we do a little bit better than some of them do, some of the stuff is just kind of ridiculous. Like I feel like on a daily basis, I'm waking up and seeing another reporter talk about how Bradley Beal can get to the Heat. And that's just, we've been saying
how many times do we have to say it?
It's not going to happen. And then there's these other reports that have come out there, including one by a reporter who does know the Heat fairly well, but that the Heat have lowered their asking price. And that's not my understanding. I don't think their asking price was ever that high. There's a certain parameter to it, which is they don't want to take guaranteed money beyond 2026, which is the summer that they're targeting, for flexibility for a variety of reasons, whether free agents become available or you can just take players into cap space and all that. They don't want to take players who go beyond 26 unless it's a player they really would want to keep. Mm-hmm. And so far, although there have been some speculation about players like a Zach LaVine or a Brandon Ingram, and we would have to talk a lot about whether or not they would even want those guys, but we're not even hearing about that caliber of player. And so they're not going to take money beyond 26 unless, again, it's somebody that they would go out and sign in 26. Okay. And so I think that's important to understand. And I think the other thing that's important to understand, Greg, and then I want to get to your feelings on all of this, is that this would be a very easy trade to execute prior to this CBA. And I don't think a lot of fans and even agents, reporters understand how restrictive this CBA is in terms of making moves. If the lifeline of the NBA now is player movement, the NBA effed themselves with this deal, okay? And I think the players effed themselves in a big way in terms of what they agreed to, okay? They signed a bad deal. And the problem with this deal is that in the past, the rules were pretty simple. You could be over the salary cap, but it was somewhat flexible. It was a soft cap in the sense that you could take salary 25% more. The percentages kept changing over the years, but essentially by the end, it was 25% more than you sent out. So you had some flexibility. But now
in trades, you mean?
In trades.
Yeah.
But now with these aprons, if you're over the first apron, it's got to be dollar for dollar. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's restrictive. And then if you have teams that are in the second apron, which the Heat are not, but Phoenix, for example, is, Boston is, if there are teams that are over the second apron, they can't even Milwaukee is, they can't aggregate players together. So in other words, they can't.
That's really punitive. It fractures you. Not fractures, but paralyzes, excuse me.
Well, it does, Greg, because the problem is that if you can't aggregate the players together, then essentially you have to create deals that is exactly the same money for two players, especially because you can't. So it's a mess. And then additionally, the other part of this is teams that may want to sweeten a deal, like throw in an extra first-round pick or something like that to get another team to take a player they may not want for the length of time their contract goes. The issue with that is that a few teams around the NBA have gobbled up all the first-round picks. So you're talking about Oklahoma City with 15 over 5 years, and Brooklyn and New Orleans and Utah, although they just gave up 3 for 1, but they still have a stash. San Antonio. So there's a handful of teams that are basically own the next 5 drafts. So these other teams don't really have sweeteners because they are short on their own picks, and you can't trade picks in successive seasons because of the step-in rule. So all of that is to say that I know fans are going to say, Greg, I'm just making excuses for the Heat why they can't make a deal. I'm just telling you, they are motivated to make a deal, but it's like this is a puzzle, and it's like when you talk about 5 teams, it's like a 10,000 piece puzzle, and you have to make sure that all the pieces fit where the team is getting sweetened enough to take somebody they don't want to take, where you have a contract that doesn't exceed by too much, where you're not dealing with a second apron team. And so that is that, and the fact that every time the Heat there seems to be some progress with the team, there's a report that comes out that Jimmy doesn't want to play there, which then lessens the motivation for said team to give the Heat more of what they may want to actually finalize the deal. And I'm speaking of Memphis specifically. So, but that's not the only one. So Greg, I guess all this is to say, as I finally go to you here, I can't guarantee there's going to be a trade by February 6th because I I don't know that all these things are going to come together by then, no matter how motivated they are. You have a view on this, though.
Yeah, and there's a couple housekeeping notes before I'll get to the overarching viewpoint, but it's not just about the 2026 money. And I know I've hammered that point home on Off the Floor and on this show. It's also like when you think about taking on salary for next season, that can stop you from being able to improve the team, whether it's spending your mid-level exception or making certain trades, being closer to any apron, or more than likely another season in the luxury tax. Like, you have to take all these things into consideration. So I think it's not just about 2026. When they talked about the Heat lowering their asking price, to me, that said, initially they told every team, we want draft picks and guys that expire as soon as possible. And now maybe they're saying, okay, it can be 2026, and we'll maybe think about it. I don't think that there's any scenario where they would take back a guy who his contract goes beyond 2026, unless it's a small salary that's like a young player. So just getting that out of the way, that I think that further just makes this hard, because Jimmy has also, basically done everything in his power to make it impossible to trade him anywhere. And
Right.
and so this is, like, I guess, where I land on it, because it's been so much about Jimmy Butler. And this season, as I saw Tyler get, the first All-Star appearance, and you see the team around him, there's a chance here with Ware starting now. Bam, John Jablanca, who's on our Off the Floor Discord server, but also has great content online. He posted like Bam's last 23 games versus first 23 games or something. Don't quote me on the number of games, but it's pretty close to that. And Bam has improved in a lot of ways. Hopefully that can continue, because he obviously needs to turn around the season offensively. But like, you have your young players. There's a chance here to like make this season matter and build something for the future and show that you've picked a direction. And I just think at some point, and it's why I've been cautioning fans on Off the Floor predominantly, because I'm trying not to post on Twitter, so that you come to Off the Floor to interact with us, that even if they just get back expiring contracts and nothing else, I'm okay with that, just to get him on his way. And this can stop being about Jimmy. Let it be about Tyler changing his game and becoming an all-star. Let it be about, these young players finding their roles. Nico starting to grow into something. Khalil Ware, becoming that player next to Bam. Like, let's move on. And like, I know that it's not that simple from a business perspective. And I also completely understand how complicated this all is. And so it's why I just think as they approach the deadline, they got to have their ear to the street, understanding what players are moving so they can get opportunistic and creative. And I know that, Andy and all those guys are on top of all this, but it's like, you got to figure out if there's going to be a move that comes out of nowhere that you can get in on, and you have this big salary in Jimmy Butler to get involved. And so I just think that that's like the hopeful way to go about it. But I'm expecting at very best, you get back expiring contracts and maybe a draft asset, but it's like, from who? That's the big part of this that we can't really hone in on. The most realistic package that anyone's thrown around that feels Miami Heat-like to me is Chris Middleton and Bobby Portis, because it kind of extends them into being competitive, but you don't see how that trade could really happen. I just think they got to find something before Thursday. They can't let this season become just an ongoing thing about what's Jimmy doing and not make it about the Miami Heat that are on the court.
Well, I'll start with this. They want to do what you're saying. They want to do what you're saying. Like, they want this to be over with. And when I say they, like, this feels like as close to a consensus throughout an organization as you can possibly get. Like, this is the front office is motivated. The coaching staff is absolutely motivated. Like, I just, I mean, this has been hardest on them. I don't. It just seems to me like it's very hard to operate under these circumstances. You have somebody who's the guy who was essentially your on court leader for a 5-year period, who has become completely rebellious and unreliable, and you're trying to essentially groom your next group of players. Like you have a 20-year-old in your starting lineup now. You've got a 25-year-old all-star. You've got a 21-year-old who's been in and out of the starting lineup in Jovic. That doesn't even include guys like Jaquez, Larson. We saw Drew Smith earlier this season. I think you're going to see more of Keshad Johnson going forward. So I mean, there's a young group that they have belief in, and we'll see what they become collectively. But having this situation hang over them is I think it's toughest on the coaching staff. It's not great for the players either, because we know it just in terms of distraction, but also just in sort of role confusion at this point. Like they need to settle on a lineup and a rotation. And this is, to me, I know you say trying to make the season matter. I don't think there's any way. I'll just put it down right now. And I said this with Brady. I don't really see any way this team as constituted, and I don't think they're getting like a big infusion of talent in the Jimmy Butler trade. So I don't see any way that this team gets out of the first round. To me,
I'm
that
with
is
you.
the ceiling this year. I think maybe they get a 6, and then they get New York or Boston in the first round, and it's sayonara. Okay, but it doesn't mean that the year can't matter if you have young players who get the playoff experience that they haven't had. I'm speaking of where specifically, but to get Jovic even more reps, okay, to have Tyler in that position again. He got schemed by Boston last year, and he's talked about he wasn't ready for it. Now you see if he'd be ready for it again, provided that he's healthy this postseason again. So there are bridge years that can be useful, and they also are useful for evaluation. And also, as you're starting to get leaner in terms of your finances, then you have
Mhm.
more flexibility to decide what you want to add to these players. The year can matter even if it flames out in the first round, which is again what I think the ceiling for this group is, as constituted. But again, it's not that they're not motivated. I think I know there are players in that room who don't want him back. They're not going to say it publicly, but it's been pretty obvious. And I think if you've been around the team, you've even heard certain comments. And I know of a couple in particular, okay, just from talking to folks around the team, that they want this over with, and it'll be easier for them in a lot of different ways once it's over with. But, so this isn't an issue of motivation; it's an issue of execution at this stage. It's an issue of what they're dealing with. And so again, I can't guarantee they're going to make a trade by the 6th. I just can't, because they can't. And
What
I think, go ahead.
what do you think, and maybe we'll do this on the other side of the break, but I'm interested to pick your brain on what you think or perceive to be when the Heat say they're not going to take a bad deal, because I think that
Mhm.
that's going to be the buzz words that fans attach themselves to if no trade happens, that like they weren't willing to take a bad deal. What does a bad deal look like? I have my thoughts as well, but I'm interested to hear yours.
I think it's negative players or contracts. That to me is a bad deal. I understand why you're framing it this way, because there are fans that are going to think it's a bad deal no matter what. Because they're going to say, a lot of those who want to get at the front office can say, well, if you traded him last summer, the Heat will say they didn't have any offers last summer, that they explored the market last summer, not aggressively, but they explored it. There wasn't anything out there. His camp has said otherwise. Of course, his camp has said that they knew of all these teams that were ready to make a trade
Houston.
as soon as Pat made his comments. Okay, right. Okay, now, again, this is another of these situations, and I can name about 100 of them, where one side says one thing and the other side could not say something more diametrically opposed. All right, there's two different realities here. It reminds me of politics in a lot of ways these days. And again, it's who you decide that you want to believe in each of these situations. Okay, I don't know personally that they had offers last year for Jimmy, so that's where I'm siding on this, because I know certain couple of national guys have speculated about Philadelphia and others. I don't know that there was ever anything that direct. But again, what is in for a lot of fans, it's going to be a bad deal no matter what, because they're going to say, well, you could have gotten more if you traded him last summer and all the rest of this. And they're going to say this player does not meet, whatever players they bring in does not meet the Jimmy Butler standard, is not at the level of Jimmy Butler. And they're going to forget that the Heat got Jimmy Butler for Josh Richardson. Okay, He got Jimmy Butler for Josh Richardson, and not only that, but they also were able to dump Hassan Whiteside in the deal, which was a plus. So it's like they didn't. It would be too much to say they even gave up Josh Richardson for Jimmy, because yes, they had to give up the first round pick. And we know that because the Dragic confusion with Dallas, they had to flip the extra first to the Clippers. So yes, you had to give up a couple picks, but literally they dumped the player that they most wanted to dump at that time in this deal. So they essentially gave up nothing for Jimmy Butler. Okay. They just paid Jimmy Butler is all they did. And then they paid him again, by the way, which is the contract that he's currently on that he doesn't want to perform on. He's withholding services in their view. Okay. So again, the fans have to get out of this mindset that you have to get value for Jimmy Butler. You were never going to get value for Jimmy Butler. So to me, it's just not making a negative trade. And by that, I mean, don't take players that in a year or two, you're going to be like, oh, God, we got to get this guy off our roster now. We got to get this guy off our payroll. We can't do this because we have to then send a pick with this guy to get rid of this guy. To me, that would be a bad deal. Like kind of what we're talking about with Terry right now, unfortunately, right? Like that's
would it
kind
be
of
Beal? Is Beal another example of
yes.
that?
Yes, yeah, they absolutely, under no circumstances. I'm going to put it out here right now, okay? I see some of this stuff on Twitter. They should not take Bradley Beal. They should not. And I'm not saying he's a bad player.
Those 3 late firsts, if they're even
No.
being offered all 3, and I don't know that they necessarily
I don't believe
are.
they've been all offered. I don't believe they've been all offered, but even if they are, they're 3 low quality first round picks because look, I always say you can't know what a first round pick is going to be in a few years. Okay, that's why this sanctifying this 2031 first round pick that Phoenix gave away to Utah and all that, like where people say, oh, the one pick 6 years, this is the golden pick. Nobody knows what's going to happen in 6 years. We don't know if Miami's going to sink into the sea in 3 years. Okay, nobody knows 6 years ahead. But I do know this: Phoenix took 3 picks that they essentially have to take the worst of the 2 each of those 3 years. They're getting the lesser of the picks. So just by nature, the odds are that the picks are going to be later in the first round. Now, the 2025 pick is interesting to me simply because this is a good draft. And I think if you give Adam Simon a pick in the 20s, he can do with it and their rest of their scouting staff can do with it what other teams would do in the, at
Late
10.
lottery.
Okay. Right, because they've gotten Bam top 5 in his draft class. They got it 14. Tyler top 5 in his draft class. That's cemented now, by the way. They got it 13. Jovic I think is going to prove better than where he was drafted. Ware is definitely going to prove better than where he was drafted. Jaquez was trending that way. We'll see. The only one is Precious, and again, Precious is played to his draft spot. It's just that Maxey and Bane went afterwards. So. I understand kind of the idea of give Adam some picks, okay? Give this group some picks, and then he can make something of them. That's why the 25 pick is interesting to me because you have a young core that you may want to fast track, and if you can get a guy in this very strong draft, there may be some benefit to that. But overall, the quality of those 3 picks is not considered to be great. And to me, Phoenix acquired those picks to sweeten deals.
Yeah.
To get rid of Beal. Okay. And I just don't understand how Beal would fit in any way with what they're trying to do here. You're talking about a guy who's going to be on the is he 30 yet? He's close, right? He's played since he's been in the NBA since he was 18.
I think he's 31.
31. Okay. He's been in the NBA since he was 18. He's not getting better. He's never been a great defender.
Yeah.
31. He's never really been 31. He's never really been associated with a lot of winning. I mean, Washington never made it past the second round when he was there. I don't really see him and Hero working together all that well in the backcourt, and especially defensively. I don't think that would be a positive. He doesn't give you any of the length at that position that they would need next to him.
And he misses more games than Jimmy does most years.
Right. And then and it comes back to this, like if you're going to do this, then just pay Jimmy. Like I don't like right? Like so like to get 2 picks, like I don't know. I understand fans who say, and we'll get to the other side of the break here. I understand fans who say, okay, we never have enough pick assets, right? So just get as many as you can and either use them or you use them in trades and all that. But you're talking about getting low quality picks. You're not going to be able to compete with San Antonio or Oklahoma City with some of the other picks that they have when a star comes available anyway. So like to me, that's like I mean, that's a fruitless chase in that sense. I think what you've done well lately is you've built an interesting young core. You're really like one or two headline type pieces away from completing it, provided that these guys develop. All right. I think the key thing you need to do is stay as clean as you can for 2026. Give yourself as many options as possible. It doesn't necessarily mean a free agent, but maybe you can take a player into some space. You get an exception, possibly, and all that. That's what makes sense. If you're not going to get that, then I think, just keep it uncomfortable for another 2 months. As much as I say that everybody wants to be done with this, the players want to be done with it, the coaches want to be done with it, we want to be done with it, the
Yeah.
staff wants to be done with it, the front office wants to be done with it. They're better off, honestly, just taking the flexibility at the end of the season. And that's why I didn't. That report that came out from Kevin O'Connor that the Heat are worried, or was it fearful, scared of
Yeah,
Jimmy
that
leaving for nothing? They're not scared of that.
no,
That's
that
not the worst case scenario. The worst
no,
case scenario is taking bad contracts. That's the worst case scenario.
you're right. And so it's like when people throw around the Middleton Portis stuff, you have to ask yourself, like, is that good enough? And are you willing to pay that high of a payroll to have those guys compared to whatever flexibility you gain? And the idea of, hey, maybe it's okay to pivot a little younger because you're in the Eastern Conference and you can be young. But when you're Miami Heat young, in terms of the way that you play the game and stuff like that, you tend to play with a little more maturity. That's just the type of guys that they tend to draft. You can actually be in the running for a playoff seed. So you're not bottoming out anyway. So I just, it sucks that you say that because I kind of feel like we're trending in that direction. Although things can heat up fast, you have to hope a team comes in out of nowhere and says, makes a last ditch effort to say, let's take a shot on this guy and see what will happen. I don't know how that is going to be received because Jimmy's been so adamant about where he wants to go. Maybe something opens up in a big deal. It's going to suck if this is continuing to plague them all the way into the summer. Then what if he opts in? It's just a mess. It'll be great for views. It'll be great for downloads, but it won't be great for the Heat's health. Emotionally, spiritually, and physically.
But we have to do the episode about what happens if he opts in. I mean, that's the episode we do on February 7th, because that is the one it's interesting to see how they would execute an exit from that. But they would have options. They would have options, and we need to go through those options. I'm just trying to clean up some of this stuff here on the other side, because I wanted to find a little bit more like what is the kind of player that would make sense taking the money past 26. And in some cases, it would be a player that you would get a look at before you had to extend him. To me, that's more palatable than somebody who is already has money that goes beyond that, and you haven't gotten a chance to see the player in your system and see how much he helps. Think about Middleton and Portis to me, and that particular deal. There are some advantages to it. Middleton and Portis are not going to elevate Miami out of the first round, not in their
No,
current state. So
you're right.
that's why this idea about having to get guys who can help now, I think that's the wrong-headed approach to this. To me, this is about getting players who could help in the future. I mean, to me, I'm looking at, okay, if you're in Memphis, can you get Jalen Wells? If you're with this,
GG
Milwaukee
Jackson.
doesn't have GG Jackson, right, in Memphis. Like, and then we have to have a conversation about Kuminga. But like, if you're looking at players like Middleton and Portis, like just to stay competitive, like that's the stuff where I'm like, I mean, what are we doing here? Like you're not beating the Knicks or Boston in the first round because you've added Middleton or Portis. Not at this stage of their respective careers.
A
It's
cultured
just
Kaminga is an interesting thought, and I know you'd have to pay him, but that might deserve an episode here in the next week or so.
well, we'll talk about this a little bit on the other side too. Do you want to mention a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network? Talk about the cultured person. Our friend Eric Rubenstein. He has the most interesting Instagram of any personal injury attorney you'll ever find. Find him at Attorney Rubenstein on IG, or Ask About Me, I Got You, which is more than just an Instagram handle. It's a way of life for our man, Mr. Rubenstein. You can find him at ericrubenstein.com or 877-829-ERIC. If you have a car accident, first person you should reach out to is Eric. Again, 877-829-3742. Based in Dade County, but he grew up in Lauderhill. Went to St. Thomas University, graduated magna cum laude. He's a Heat fan. He's at all the games. You'll find him there. And when he's not there, he's in court helping you get your monies. Check him out again, 877-829-3742. So you mentioned Kuminga, and Ingram's name has come up now.
Although, why would New Orleans, who's trying to get out of the luxury tax, take on Jimmy? That's got to be like he goes somewhere else, right?
Yeah, I read that report from Stein, and I don't even know if Jimmy's camp has to put out the memo that he doesn't want to go to New Orleans. Like, I feel like it's kind of self-explanatory. Like, I don't really understand why David Griffin and the group there would do that. That felt to me again like, I know Stein said that New Orleans reached out to the Heat to try to do a deal directly there. I still feel like it would be a bigger deal than that, because I don't see how Jimmy makes any sense there, or why he would extend there, or why they would want to extend there. They're not have no hopes for this season. Obviously, that thing is completely fallen apart. So I don't get that one at all. I think if we're talking about Brandon Ingram, there's been a lot of talk about how Toronto has interest in Brandon Ingram. They've wanted to get involved in one of these trades, kind of fast forward their rebuilding process a little bit. Ingram on the Heat is a conversation that we've had. I mean, he wanted $50 million. I don't think he's getting that now. He's not healthy a whole lot, but he is on Bam's timeline in terms of age. He's 27. I do think as a player, he would fit on this team. I think you put his ability to his mid-range game, ability to stretch the floor a little bit. I feel like putting that at the 3 with Bam and Ware would make sense. I think he could flourish offensively here, but I don't know if he has a Heat mindset. Just based on some of the stuff that's happened before. You remember last year, they didn't even want to play him in the play-in game. Zion got hurt, and Ingram sat the entire fourth quarter, which tells you a lot in what was a big game for them last year. So I have my reservations about it, but if you're talking about the kind of player that you bring in, and then if say he ended up in Miami somehow through some kind of convoluted trade, again, I don't think it would be a 1-for-1. But if that was to happen, well, it can't be anyway because the money doesn't match. But I'm saying I don't think it would just be a 2-team trade between the two of them.
Moving parts.
Moving parts. I think Jimmy would end up somewhere else. But at least you'd get a look at him with your group.
What about Wiggins?
Wiggins is interesting because I don't think Wiggins is a negative contract anymore. I don't think he's a positive contract because he's got that extra year in there that would take them beyond where they want to go with it. I think Wiggins. We saw the best of Wiggins in that run for Golden State to the championship. Typically, he's been a player who hasn't really stepped forward, hasn't really reached his potential. I don't know if necessarily Miami could drag more out of him. I think theoretically, he's the kind of player who would fit next to Hero. You're talking about length. He's become a very good three-point shooter over time. He can handle a little bit. He has been a good defender when he's been motivated. It's not a bad contract. I don't think it's a great contract. I think it's one of those that might make me think a little bit. But beyond that, I mean, you look at these kind of players, I don't know who. I mean, Fox, we're going to keep coming back to Fox, I guess, because until San Antonio decides to give up Castle and actually consummates a deal for him, then I guess the possibility is still out there since we know Miami is on his list.
That's the dream, by the way, just so that everyone's clear. The dream is that you somehow parlay the Jimmy situation into De'Aaron Fox, just so that no one's mistaking what Heat fan priority 1 would be, or preference 1, I'll say.
Well, and that's true, but again, Jimmy's not going to Sacramento, right? So
hell no.
So he has to be routed somewhere else, and so we just keep coming back to this same thing, which is that if he's going to be so insistent on Phoenix, and that's going to scare other teams off from making their best offers, then we just keep coming back to who's going to take Bradley Beal, and the Heat are not going to do it. And so I just still don't see what team that is. I mean, every time a team is thrown out there, whether it's Chicago or something else, the team is thrown out. So I just keep coming back. I'm going to keep coming back to the same thing. Like, they're motivated to make a trade. I think it's in everybody's best interest for them to make a trade.
They're going to try like hell.
They're going to try like hell for all the reasons that you've stated. I don't know that they're going to be able to make a trade. I don't like I have no confidence in it. I keep getting told by people I talk to in the situation, oh, this will be done by Monday. This will be done by this. Nothing's gotten done.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's gotten
I've
done.
heard the same
And the
kind of
Heat,
stuff, like rumblings come and you're like, oh shit, is something about to pop off? And then nothing. And then, you
no.
check in and they're like, no, there's nothing going on.
Right. And every time that I mean, the one thing I heard had gotten some traction was Memphis, and then the reports came out that he wasn't going to go there, and it sort of just slunk back into the bushes. Like I don't. So I wish I had better news for Heat fans. I say this will probably happen right in the middle of my daughter's soccer game on Thursday at about what time is the deadline? Is it 3 o'clock Eastern or 4 o'clock Eastern? They usually let them go an extra hour,
Yeah,
typically,
it's
because they got to get
yeah,
all the
because they
pieces.
got
They
to
got to
get
get
in
called in the
line.
league.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think it's 3 o'clock. But don't quote me on that. But I'll be around.
And and if it's a 17-team trade and all that, then they got to get everybody to call in, right? They got to stay on the call. They got to make sure. Then they got to get the physicals. They got to get the players flown to the right place. I mean, this could be going on forever. This could be going on longer than some elections. But uh, my hunch right now, my hunch, and strictly a hunch, is that I don't think anything gets done.
I'm gonna
It's just a
just let
hunch.
that sit there.
Good night, everybody.